Hey guys, I'm Dov, and today I'm back with more Total War Warhammer 2 online action. We're here with the Warriors of Chaos, with Big Bird facing up against the Wood Elves. Let's go ahead and take a look at the army composition. So up against the Wood Elves, you're going to see a lot of missile play. They have very powerful skirmishers, and particularly a lot of magic missiles. So Sarthrel the Everwatcher is definitely the best pick in my opinion. Of course, he has 60% mystical resistance and 25% magic resistance, both of which apply to something like a Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts or a Glady. Her missiles are also magic, so it'll mitigate, 85% of the total damage there. Very powerful. Of course, he's unbreakable as well. It's got Searing Doom, which is good against low armor targets. Of course, the Wood Elves have plenty of those. Plague of Rust is good against tree units, and Transmutation of Lead is just a great all-around debuff in almost any situation. So he's very, very powerful here. For the main line, we've got 6 Marauders, just the regular Sword and Board Marauders to catch arrows. They'll trade pretty cost effectively with most Wood Elf infantry as well. Since most Wood Elf infantry is relatively low armor, you don't need armor piercing. You can just bring the Sword and Board variety. We've got 2 Aspiring Champions to support their leadership. On the flanks, 4 units of Forsaken, 2 on each flank. These guys are very strong against the Wood Elves. Of course, they've got 63 weapon strength under the effects of Frenzy, which is absolutely massive. They do only have 60 unit models, relatively low health, but they do also have 75 armor, and 37 charge bonus, which is pretty formidable for a unit of infantry. Very strong against the Wood Elves. In addition, we've also got 3 units of Chaos Chariots. So you guys may have seen the replay the other day with the High Elves versus the Wood Elves. I brought the Tyrannok Chariots. I do like the Chaos Chariots in this matchup for the same reasons. They're nice and cheap, although they don't have a missile attack. They're, 750 is relatively cheap for a unit of Chariots. Do have anti-infantry, 90 armor, and a 76 charge bonus. They'll do a lot of impact damage, and with the relatively low mass of Wood Elf infantry, if they don't bring something like Wild Riders or Treekin to bog down the Chariots, they're going to just be able to run shop all over their infantry. So it's very, very strong stuff. That's about it for my build. For my opponent's build, he's brought Orion, who's a very, very strong, although I don't think he's the best pick in this matchup. Orion's biggest issue is he doesn't have a lot of armor. The Cloak of Isha, which my opponent has brought here, makes him very hard to kill, but, it's still relatively rough. He'll get put down by Archaon and a lot of others. Big Bird in particular has 60 melee attack and 40 melee defense. He also does magic damage. So I believe the Cloak of Isha does actually give... Oh no, it is damage resistance. Okay, so that will mitigate his damage. However, still only 30 armor. He does do armor piercing damage and has a really nice missile attack. And of course he's unbreakable, causes fear and terror. So there's a lot to like about Orion in this matchup, but I don't know that he's the best pick. A Glady on a dragon can be very good. The Prey of Anathema is obviously a very strong ability. I believe, if memory serves, it also gives a minus percentage to missile resistance, which is very good against Big Bird, because it means that if you do choose to shoot at him, it's still not going to be great, but it'll be a little more cost effective. But anyway, for my opponent's main line, it looks like Eternal Guards up front, no shields, 1 unit of Wildwood Rangers in the center, looks like actually 2 units. He's got 3 Glade Guards with Starfire Shafts, 1 Spellsinger with the Lore of Shadows, or sorry, it's actually a Branch Wraith. Interesting. Branch Wraith is a pretty good unit. It's very tanky with 60 armor and physical resistance, a little bit weak to fire, which can be a risk against chaos. But he does have Earthblood and the Withering, so both very good spells. Withering would be particularly good if he had some, Dryads or War Dancers, just to be able to make them trade more cost-effectively with Chaos Warriors. Dryads in particular, I think, might be good in this matchup because they'll cut up Marauders, and with something like the Withering, they could potentially be good against the Chaos Warriors, although they would get cut down pretty hard. I'd be interested to test that out. But he's also got this unit of Hawk Riders here. And that's about it. Oh yeah, I've also got these 2 units of Marauder Horsemen with Javelins. Of course, you need plenty of mobility in case the Wood Elves go full-on skirmish build. So nice to have the Marauder Horsemen. You don't need AP, so just bring the regular Javelin variety. They're currently doing some skirmishing with these Hawk Riders here. Hawk Riders are going to come down into melee, but they will take quite a bit of damage from the Javelins right to the face. So it's not going to be exactly free. My opponent doing a good job of not bothering to shoot at Big Bird. Granted, I have left him way in the back here. I'm going to be bringing him up shortly. But these Glade Guards with Starfire Shafts do very, very little against Big Bird, so he's doing a good job right now. Granted, I don't have a lot of really good targets for them to shoot at. It's mostly just fodder units, but you can see the mainline engagement going down here. We're going to get Marauders clashing with these Eternal Guards here. And just in a straight-up melee fight, I believe Marauders will trade very effectively here. They do have a, relatively equivalent combat stats. They do have a higher base weapon strength, but, it should be very close. The terror from Orion is going to be a little bit of an issue here in the center. You can see both of these units of Marauders breaking. But here comes Big Bird. He's angry about this situation. You can see the transmutation of lead going down here, mitigating the attack and weapon damage stats of all these units in this area of effect. Very, very strong. Unit of Wildwood Rangers is immediately regretting their life decisions. Meanwhile, over on this flank, we're getting the chariots to begin running shop. My opponent did have 2 units of Wild Riders hidden in the woods that I failed to see earlier, but we are going to get on them with the Forsaken here very shortly. Forsaken are a very good matchup for Wild Riders. If Wild Riders don't get the charge on the Forsaken, they'll suffer very, very badly. My opponent, though, doing a good job of trying to stay on some of my mobile units here, charging around in the back line. We have compromised with these Forsaken just because I have so many more unit models. A little bit of miss micro here, but I should be pushing back with these Marauders. I am going to do so shortly. But my opponent now bogging down the chariots with the Hawk Riders, who actually do have armor piercing and melee, so that'll be a pretty good play. But I have 3 units of chariots, and he just doesn't have enough mobility to shut them all down at the same time. Meanwhile, Big Bird's being an absolute terror here in the center. He's now got Orion isolated here, so we're going to get a bit of a duel situation. And Orion's definitely suffering a little bit to the greater mass of Big Bird. He's got some aspiring champions and Forsaken in here helping as well. But, although Orion does have 30 armor, Big Bird is going to be able to cast Plague of Rust and bring him down to 0 armor, which is going to be absolutely terrible. All these, Chaos Poison Warhounds, everything else, any attacks that make contact with him are going to be doing their full damage. So it's really, really bad news for Orion. He's taking a lot of damage here. Granted, with that Cloak of Isha, he's going to be very hard to kill, but still, in the back line, my opponent's suffering pretty badly. You can see these Wild Riders are actually wavering here up against the Marauders. There's just so many bodies for them to try and cut through, and Marauders, although they don't have armor piercing, again, you don't really need armor piercing in this matchup. My opponent dropping an Earthblood here, trying to keep these Hawk Riders in the fight, which is a very good play. That Branch Wraith is somewhere around here. Branch Wraiths are actually surprisingly hard to kill. Aspiring Champions will do a pretty good job of it because they have magic attacks, so they'll cut through the physical resistance. He does have 60 armor, which is, pretty decent, but Aspiring Champions do have 44 weapon strength, so any attacks they do get on him will be able to make pretty solid contact. But a bombardment from my opponent there, missing a little bit, but, it's all good. Orion at this point is suffering pretty badly. The Cloak of Isha is going to be procking very, very soon. I'm just using the chariots to try and break up these infantry that are attempting to support this fight, just to make sure that we've got Orion nice and isolated here. And, oh man, he actually had that guy. Did you see that? He had that guy wrapped up in his staff. I've seen that animation play a few times before. Always very, very cool. But, in the back line, the Marauders are continuing to just rampage around, and most of my opponent's force is shattering at this point. Very atrocious trade. We lost quite a few guys, but, plenty of these Forsaken carrying through on the flanks, relatively healthy. The Aspiring Champions also did absolutely incredible job of just holding together the leadership. The magic attacks are also good against any tree units, particularly if you combine them with Plague of Rust from Sartharel. They can potentially put down things like Treekin or Durthu. It can be tough because the chariots then can't run shop quite as well on infantry if they bring a lot of tree units. But, I definitely would say that Durthu's good in this matchup. The risk is if they bring Lore of Fire, your tree units are going to suffer pretty badly. Even to something like a Forsaken with Flaming Sword of Ruin, they'll put down tree units in a pretty big hurry. So it's a risk, definitely. But, typically you'll see Big Bird in this matchup just because he has such good missile resistance stats that he's almost a no-brainer against the Wood Elves. So Orion's going to kick the can here very, very soon. And well played to my opponent. Hope you guys enjoyed watching that battle. We'll go ahead and take a look at another Big Bird replay just because I'm such a big fan. Big Bird's honestly one of my favorite legendary lords, and definitely very cool. Lots of good utility. So let's take a look at the breakdown. For myself, the Forsaken, like I said, on the flanks, just getting a ton of kills. Although the Chaos Marauders didn't get a whole lot of kills in and of themselves, they were able to trade relatively cost-effectively. The Eternal Guard didn't get a whole lot of kills either, so it's all good. The Chariots didn't take a whole lot of damage there. They ended with full health, which means they did take HP damage throughout the fight, but they didn't lose any unit models, which is critical for chariots. The Marauder Horsemen didn't get a whole lot of kills, but they were able to apply some nice pressure to those Hawk Riders. And just overall, losing Orion was pretty tough. Getting him isolated by Big Bird was definitely a bad situation. And just getting outclassed in the infantry fight, the Wildwood Rangers were able to do quite a bit of damage, but again, they don't have a lot of armor, which means this is the same problem that Plague Monk Censer Bearers have. They'll trade very inefficiently with low-tier troops because they don't have a lot of armor. So if you can inundate them with a lot of, relatively high DPS, lower-tier troops, like Marauders and Forsaken, they can definitely cut them up pretty quickly, especially if you get, a Marauder in the front and then a Forsaken from behind. They'll cut up, Plague Monk Censer Bearers or Wildwood Rangers in a big hurry. Let's go ahead and take a look at a Big Bird versus Skaven matchup, because Big Bird, as I have said many times, is an excellent pick in that matchup. If I can find it here. Apologize, there's a lot of replays here, but let's see. There it is. So this is a replay from a while back, but still relevant to take a look at. So let's go ahead and get things rolling. So for my build, of course, Big Bird, it's a very similar build to last game, except I've upgraded my Marauder Horsemen to throwing axes, just because they're going to be a little bit better versus Doom Wheels. They'll be able to deal armor-piercing damage and potentially kite a Doom Wheel around, so that's why I upgrade those guys. Other than that, the build is pretty much the same across the board. Big Bird's got the same loadout of spells. Of course, Plague of Rust in case he gets caught in a duelist situation, or, to pull the armor from a Doom Wheel, or so on. Very, very strong. You can see immediately my opponent opening up shots with that Warp Lightning Cannon here. You can see he did indeed bring a Doom Wheel over on this flank, and I Vanguard deployed up my Marauder Horseman with throwing axes. Going to be chucking some axes into the side here, dealing some nice armor-piercing damage right off the bat. For my opponent's build, he's got, looks like Gutter Runners with Poison Slings up front. Looks like a couple Gutter Runners without poison, a couple with poison. Skaven Slave Meat Shield line with a defensive formation here of Clan Rat Spears. And two units of Death Runners in the very back, so very interesting. No Plague Monks. He does have the obligatory Lord Skrolk Hero Squad with 2 Assassins and Lord Skrolk, very formidable. Let's see how we can do. You guys have heard me talk a lot about the Skaven control style of play. All these Gutter Runners do have the snare nets, I believe, so that's going to be very nice for him to gain some control and be able to bog down the chariots as they advance. You can see this chariot's already taken quite a bit of damage and is currently snare netted, so they're having a hard time being able to move out of this area. But we are still going to be able to disrupt my opponent's formation. And the key with Chaos versus Skaven is disruption. That's why I bring chariots, and Big Bird is great at disruption as well. So if you take a look at kind of an overarching sense of the battle here, we've got these 3 chariots coming in very, very early that are going to kind of overload this one flank and force an asymmetric engagement. Meanwhile, we're kiting around this Doom Wheel, and although it is going to be able to do some damage in return and potentially see off 1 or 2 of these units, we are going to be able to do some damage in return, and we can keep it occupied while my infantry advances so that he can't then gain control of the battle by coming in here and breaking up my advance, which is very, very much what the Doom Wheel is meant to do, in my opinion, especially if you have artillery. Now, the Warp Lightning Cannon is taking shots here, getting some nice hits on the Chaos Chariots. If it switches its targeting over to Big Bird here, we'll be able to see it's going to do very little damage because, of course, it is magic missiles. You can see the magic symbol near the ammunition there. So it is going to do very little damage to Sarthrel with his missile resistances. So let's go ahead and kick things into full gear. Big Bird's just coming forward. My opponent can try and inundate him with this hero squad here, but it's not gonna be too great because I'll just be able to pull back towards my lines. At this point, I'm just trying to terrify away some of these Skaven Slave meat shields and just deal with the meat shield before you can see they're terrified. And you saw that hit. It knocked Big Bird down, but it hardly did any damage. It maybe did 100 points worth of damage. Same thing there. Very little damage. It does knock him over, but it's really not worth shooting at him. It's doing very, very little damage. The Liber Bubonicus as well being cast on him. That will do a fair amount of damage, but of course the 25% magic resistance will mitigate quite a bit of that. Now, this is a bit of a mistake here, charging in Big Bird after Lord Skrolk. I was getting a little bit greedy here. The 2 assassins are going to be able able to punish me for that, so I'll have to pull away. But at this point, the disruption is very real. We're getting the infantry main line into the fight without having taken hardly any damage, in that approach. We're going to be able to cut through these Skaven slaves in relatively short order with the combination of Forsaken and Chaos Marauders here. Meanwhile, the chariots are continuing to disrupt on this flank and really not allowing my opponent to reinforce with these Death Runners like he really needs to. This unit of Death Runners took a nasty volley from the Searing Doom. I failed to catch that earlier, but my opponent's lines at this point, the Skaven slaves are gone, so we're getting into his second line here. Gutter Runners do have relatively good combat stats, but they're going to fall very quickly to Forsaken, and just pushing through at this point. My opponent really doesn't have the infantry to stand up here, doesn't have any Plague Monks to speak of. The Death Runners are over here supporting, and now my opponent switched his Warp Lightning Cannon onto my chariots, which is a much better target. The balance of power is still very close. I am having to be careful of Big Bird not to get him caught out by the assassins here, but we've now collapsed completely over on this flank. The Doom Wheel did come back from seeing off those Marauder Horsemen, but it has taken a lot of damage already. You can see it's already at about 30% HP, so it's going to be really rough. Meanwhile, we're just continuing to push through on this flank, just completely collapse the Skaven pocket. This is what you need to do. The disruption's very real at this point. My chariots did take quite a bit of damage, so I'm just going to pull them around in this forest here, and hopefully we can block up some of those shots from the Warp Lightning Cannon. They're taking a lot of damage here, but you can see we're just aggressively collapsing with all the infantry here, trying to get on this back line here, and just really not letting the pressure off my opponent. This is what you've got to do with the Skaven. You can see he's got a lot of forces regrouping here, but we are going to send some forces back to just try and press them off the battlefield here. Meanwhile, Big Bird collapsing in and going to be finally terror routing away the crew of this Warp Lightning Cannon, which means I'm going to be able to activate my chariots again, try and bring them back around in here. One of them did get routed off. The other one, I believe, got destroyed, but we still have the one left here. And at this point, most of the Skaven infantry is pretty much gone. We do have this one summoned unit of Plague Monks that's fighting, but they're kind of mixed in here with all these the Forsaken and the the Chaos Marauders and everything, so they're really not too happy about life. The assassins are continuing to deal quite a bit of damage to Sarthrel, but at this point, this one's now terrified. Lord Skrolk is going to take quite a bit of damage from Sarthrel. Of course, Sarthrel doesn't have a lot of armor, so his main weakness is that he can get taken down relatively easily in melee. So we're now just going to tuck and run with him and try and swarm with the Forsaken and other units, kind of countercharge here and wrap up these heroes and just finish this fight off. At this point, the balance of power is pretty heavily in my favor, and we're just pushing through the woods now, trying to force the rest of these forces off the side of the map here. So Big Bird's a very fun lord, very aggressive style of play. I really like him in this matchup against the Wood Elves and against the Empire. Of course, Hammer of Witches and Silver Bullets are a huge menace with the Empire, and against a diving, Boris or other Griffin Lord, you can use the Plague of Rust with Poison Warhounds, and Sarthrel can then turn around using his 60 melee attack, or yeah, 60 melee attack. It was mitigated there for a moment, but the trophy heads very strong. Anyway, he can use his 60 melee attack in the Plague of Rust to really, fight back against a diving lord, and it's also very good against demis. You inundate demis with Forsaken and use an overcast Plague of Rust, and the Forsaken will pretty much beat them, which is super cost inefficient for the demis. So my opponent doing a very good job inundating me with these Death Runners here. They're centering his armor down. Oh, only 15, not a big deal. But at this point, we're pretty much wrapped up. The two assassins are very much surrounded by Marauders and Forsaken at this point. The Aspiring Champion's charging in as well. Big Bird is just running away from these Death Runners. Of course, he's unbreakable, so he'll fight to the bitter end, and his charge animations and his high mass makes him super hard to catch for light infantry like the Skaven bring. So the Death Runners are going to get terrified away there. Skrolk himself routs, and that's going to be game. So we'll play to my opponent. I hope you guys enjoyed that Big Bird double cast. 114 kills on that one, and you can see across the line for the Forsaken, 160, 153. It's what you would expect to see against the Skaven with Forsaken. You definitely want them to get this many kills. The Chariots, while they didn't rack up a whole lot of kills in this particular build, they did, cause a great amount of disruption and really prevented these Gutter Runners from being effective in any way. Personally, I would have probably cut these guys and brought the Gutter Runners with Shurikens, because then you can move them up and skirmish very aggressively, since they can fire in, all directions. If I would have given chase with my Chariots, then they can skirmish away and slow down and continuously deal damage while they're skirmishing away. So personally, I like the Gutter Runners with the Shurikens a little bit better here. Death Runners are pretty decent as well, although personally I like Plague Monks a little bit better, particularly if you're going to bring Lord Skrolk and you have the Overcast Wither. You don't really need Death Runners. You can go a little bit cheaper and get the Plague Monks. Similarly to the Clan Rat Spears, personally, the Clan Rat Spears are pretty decent, but I would have taken just Skaven Slave Spears instead, because they're a bit cheaper, and again, you could maybe save some funds there and get another unit of Plague Monks or something else. I do like the pick of the Doom Wheel. The Warp Lightning Cannon is good. It's a bit of a risk, but it did do some good damage against my chariots, so I guess it was pretty effective. It's not going to be good against Big Bird by any means, but it definitely could have some good targets to shoot at. Skaven Slaves, of course, they're a good meat shield. You may want to try and scrape up the extra gold to upgrade these guys to Skaven Slave Slingers or Spears, both of which have a little bit better utility, but, you know, they're mostly just meat shield units anyway. But I definitely like the Skrolk Hero Squad. You guys will see me use this quite a bit. It's very powerful. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you like this kind of content, like and subscribe. I'm keeping it coming with more Total War Warhammer 2 content every single day, so stay tuned for more, and we'll see you next time.